Hello and welcome. Today we're diving into a really compelling theory from our sources. It looks at financial crises not as these random, chaotic accidents, but as recurring, maybe even predictable events. It's a perspective that suggests there might be a deliberate cycle behind the booms and busts that have shaped our world for centuries.
And it all starts with this question, right? Why do these crises seem to repeat themselves over and over again? From the Great Depression to the Asian financial crisis, the patterns can feel just eerily similar. Is it just a flaw in human nature? Or could there be some kind of strategy at play? Well, the sources we're looking at today propose a very specific answer to that question.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First up, we'll define the core tactic itself. Then we'll get into the two-phase process that allegedly makes it all work. After that, we'll examine some pretty significant historical case studies, explore the supposed ultimate goal, which might surprise you, and finally, we'll connect it all to the very real human cost. Okay, let's start with the central idea. The sources we're examining today describe a specific strategy, and honestly, it has a pretty unforgettable name. This is the fleecing of the flock. In essence, the theory goes like this. Economic cycles are deliberately manipulated to create a crisis. Why? Well, that crisis then allows valuable assets, we're talking everything from small businesses to entire national industries, to be bought up for pennies on the dollar, often by the very international financiers who allegedly triggered the downturn in the first place. The sources use this really powerful metaphor to explain it. It's like raising fish in a pond. First, you create the perfect conditions for growth, you let the fish get big and fat. But the end goal here isn't a healthy, thriving pond, it's the harvest. And that simple analogy really illustrates the two-step logic perfectly. So, you're probably wondering, how is the cycle of boom and bust actually engineered, according to this theory? Well, it breaks down into two very distinct phases. Step 1 is called the fattening. This is when a huge amount of cheap credit gets pumped into an economy. Money is easy to borrow, which of course fuels a massive boom. People and businesses take on tons of debt to invest, driving up the prices of things like real estate and stocks, and boom, you've got these massive asset bubbles. Then comes step 2, the fleecing. Just as the boom hits its peak, the credit supply is suddenly drastically tightened. Interest rates are hiked, and that easy flow of money just stops cold. You can see the contrast right here. The boom is all about easy credit and what feels like prosperity, even if it's artificial. But in the bust, that credit vanishes. It leads to mass bankruptcies and asset values just collapsing. Widespread optimism is flipped overnight into widespread panic. And according to this theory, that dramatic shift, it isn't an accident. It's the entire point of the mechanism. Now, I know this might sound a little out there, like something from a movie, but the sources we're drawing from point to several major historical events as alleged examples of this very tactic in practice. Our sources highlight a few key moments. Back in 1815, after the Battle of Waterloo, Nathan Rothschild is said to have used misinformation to crash the London bond market, only to swoop in and buy it all back for basically nothing, seizing control of Britain's finances. Then you have 1929 and the Great Depression, which was preceded by years of easy credit followed by a sudden rate hike. The crash wiped out thousands of smaller banks. And more recently, in 1997, sophisticated currency attacks absolutely crippled Southeast Asian economies, pushing them right into the arms of the IMF. Yeah, this comparison is pretty fascinating. In 1815, the main tool was just spreading misinformation. The target was the government bond market, and the alleged outcome was control of the national bank. But fast forward to 1997, and wow, have the tools evolved. Now we're talking about complex financial derivatives, things some have even called financial nukes. The target shifted from a single market to entire national currencies. And the outcome? Forced IMF loans and the mandatory privatization of state-owned assets. So the strategy adapts, but the alleged goal seems to stay the same. And that brings us to a really crucial point in this theory. The objective isn't just about making a ton of money. According to these sources, the ultimate goal is far, far more ambitious. This quote from one of our sources really just captures the whole argument. The controlled dismantlement of an economy. Think about that. It suggests the aim is to fundamentally break a nation's ability to control its own money supply, its monetary sovereignty. That's the power to create currency and direct economic policy for the good of its own people. So how is this actually achieved? Well, the sources lay out a pretty clear playbook. First, push to privatize the central bank. That way, money is no longer issued by the government, but is instead created as debt by private bankers. Then, during the crisis you've created, force the fire sale of a nation's most strategic assets. We're talking water supply, power grids, telecom networks. This is often done by imposing harsh conditions through international bodies, which trap nations in a never-ending cycle of debt, where the interest payments alone make sure they can never, ever be free. So far, we've been talking about this in terms of high finance and geopolitics, which can all feel a bit abstract. But what does this actually mean for the people living through it? Well, the human cost is absolutely staggering. Just look at this number. In the early 1980s, the Mexican peso was about 12 to the US dollar. By 1989, after a series of debt crises and devaluations, often linked to these very policies, it took 2,300 pesos to equal a single dollar. Can you just imagine an entire nation's savings becoming virtually worthless almost overnight? The real-world impact is just devastating. People's life savings and pensions, built over decades of hard work, they just vanish. Small and medium-sized businesses go bankrupt, not because they weren't viable, but because they couldn't get credit, and that leads to mass unemployment. Governments, forced by loan conditions, have to cut subsidies on absolute necessities like food and fuel, which often triggers riots and social chaos. And in the end, the wealth built by the hard work of millions is systematically transferred into the hands of a select few. So, we're left with this one final core question that our sources pose. When a nation can't control its own currency, when its key assets are owned by foreign interests, and its policies are dictated by its creditors, who really controls its economic lifeblood? It's a challenging question, and it's at the very heart of the theory we've explored today. Thanks so much for watching.